Well, hello everyone. Thank you very much for sharing an hour of your life with us today to learn about fundraising from Asia from the donor's perspective. I'm particularly excited about this one because I do feel we're sort of redeeming ourselves from an event we did numbers of years ago where we had somebody talking about Asia that was an expert on Asia, but really didn't know what it was like not being in Asia. So he could tell you very much what Asians what was going on, but he couldn't understand or couldn't think through. And this is what's so crucial to us is what do people outside the region, what do people outside the country need to understand about the mentality? And we are so privileged to have Francis Hon with us, who is going to be able to do that because he has both been, he's from the regions, from Hong Kong. He's worked at HSBC with the donor side of it. He's also worked with the charity side, both fundraising in the region, fundraising from the region in the United States and the United Kingdom. And so that is such a really brilliant, he really will be able to bring that understanding of the region, but also translate it into what do we need to know if we're fundraising from that region rather than being in there. He's got an LLB from the University of London. He is the founder and managing partner of Covent Impact Consulting. And I think this is going to be absolutely a brilliant opportunity for us to learn everything. So you don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from Francis. So I'm going to turn over to him. If you do have questions that you want answered, then please put them in the chat like always. We'll try to get to them. If it's something which is what he's talking about, he'll break in and answer the question there. Otherwise, we'll do it at the end. So with no further ado, Francis, over to you.
Thank you, Nancy. So thanks, Nancy, and everyone in Chapel and York to have me here today to share with all of you about actually donors from the donors perspective of philanthropy and fundraising in Asia. I think what makes this sharing exciting for me and hopefully for all of you is that Asia is such a big place, and we have a lot of different communities and cultures in Asia. And also because Asia is so big and there are different generations of people coming from different backgrounds, we are also talking about a lot of different mindsets, a lot of different expectations. And I think on the other side of the equation, what also makes this exciting and interesting is that all of you, or all of us here, we are from different organizations. I know some of us are from universities, others are from cultural institutions, and I know that there are some even the participants for today who comes from or are actually based in Asia. So we are talking about a lot of variables about things, but I think what hopefully unites us is our passion on impact, and as I'll share later, that we believe that, and also from my experience of working with quite a number of donors in Asia, that a lot of them are also enthusiastic about impact, enthusiastic about using the money to do good to the world. So I think with that kind of central thought, and with that as a basis to build trust, I think there are a lot of potentials for institutions like what all of us are helping in to be really engaged with donors in Asia and do good things together. So before we really start our questions and answer session, and before we have conversation, I would like to spend around 5 to 10 minutes to just very quickly do some groundwork to talk about some of the main points that I would like to share with you, and then we can jump on to our conversations and questions and answer. So can you see this, the presentation that I've just put up? Okay, great. So we are really talking about building trust and lasting partnerships across Asia. So as I reflect on this for today and also in my past around 15, 20 years of working in this field, I would say that first and foremost, Asians are about relationships. So they treasure relationships a lot for whatever we do. Like we treasure relationships when people ask us out for lunch, go to yum cha, or when we travel. And particularly, I mean, for something as personal and as crucial as philanthropy, a lot of Asians care a lot about relationships. But relationships here, we are not just talking about personal relationships. So I know a lot of institutions are very keen to get their vice chancellor or get their board chair or get their CEO in front of donors, which I think is great. But at the same time, a lot of donors or potential donors also enjoy that kind of institutional relationships in the sense that they want to know more about their institutions, whether that's an orchestra or a university or a museum or something else. And they also enjoy knowing academics, they enjoy knowing the curators, they enjoy knowing the violinist. So I think from a relationship building perspective, and also from the perspective of building lasting and sustainable relationship, we have to bear in mind that institutional relationships are both important and effective. The other thing that I think Asian philanthropists attract to is the kind of engagement with the Western world. So a lot of them, especially the second generation or even the third generation, they are Western educated, right? They went to universities in Europe or in North America. So engaging with sort of Western institutions gives them another opportunity to speak more English, for example, or know more about what's happening culturally or intellectually in the Western world. And that could be a small point, but it also let them, for example, if they travel to the UK, they will have somewhere cool to go, right? They can go to a particular city or go to a particular venue and have people who they personally know to receive them and take them to places or to go backstage and see the concert venue or go to some research facilities and to take a look at what's happening uh, when scientists are doing their research. So that kind of engagement, I think, is also important. Cultural and intellectual exposure is probably another thing that a lot of Asians are attracted to. So, I mean, they are fascinated to learn about the newest research or to know about some new concert pieces being commissioned and premiered, or that they would have the chance to uh, have a one-on-one or a small group conversation with a scientist that's doing some cutting-edge cancer research, for example. So that kind of exposure, I think, is very valuable. And another is the global impact footprint. So global, I mean, both global and local. So then Asian philanthropists have the opportunity of doing something that is not just benefiting their home country or their hometown, but globally. And at the same time, they will be able to bring some of the global resources, uh, whether that's research or concerts or visual arts or performing arts, back to local, back to their hometown or their home country. So they are also playing that bridge, the role of a bridge. The other thing is that is the kind of uh, international affiliation and the reputation that comes from it. So Asians care a lot about their reputation, which could be a good thing, right? And the fact that they are affiliated with international partners through their donation is also one important incentive for them. Um, and I've got asked a lot about the kind of cross-border engagement that are effective and useful. And I think a lot of us think, I think rightly, about presence. So of course, a lot of us know that if institutions have physical presence locally, for example, I used to work for University of Chicago, and the University of Chicago has a physical campus in Hong Kong. So then of course that's very effective. But it's not always possible, and it's not even always possible or practical or effective or efficient to have someone full-time on the ground, right? It's expensive, and if you don't have that kind of infrastructure, it's hard to make very good use of whoever is your full-time staff on the ground. So then in that sense, or the kind of presence that you want to think about instead could be a regular visit, right? You come to an Asian uh, location regularly and tell people ahead when you are coming or who are going to come with you. Those presents can also be if you have people doing seminars or doing concerts, if you have a choir, for example. Or presence can be your alumni community. That can be webinars, that can be exhibitions. So all those presents count because that would remind people of you, and that would also slowly, gradually, but steadily um, prove that you are really serious about Asia. You're not just there to make quick money, get a few donors and go. That kind of presence also help you learn more about Asia. You talk to make friends, you talk to people, you understand the sentiment on the ground, and all that would help you think about a good program or a good way of raising money in Asia. And there are quite a number of things that you can leverage. If there's an alumni community, that's great. If there's a diaspora community back in your home country or your hometown, you can also try to ask them to be a bridge. Your academics, you can do cultural events, and and ideally, you can also get local partners. For example, you collaborate with a local university to do some exhibitions regularly, or you partner with a local orchestra and they invite some of your musicians to come to, for example, Hong Kong, so that you can build a brand. The other thing I want to add is that when you think about cross-border engagement, think about your target audiences, families, and businesses. So very often when they engage or when they want to do something, it's also for the benefit of their children or their grandchildren or their businesses. Uh, so think about what you are going to do is going to impact on their families and the businesses. So one short note about trust. So a lot of time we are talking about how to build trust between sort of Western institutions and Asian donors. So a lot of Asian donors would think that, oh, look, uh, they have to accept my money because a lot of the Western institutions need a lot of resources to survive and to flourish. But I think it's also important to let them know, and they will respect you for that, that for Western institutions, nothing is more important than values and mission, right? I think rightly, of course, I don't know whether it does sound high sounding, but I think it's important to let people know that, look, we we like your money, right? But there's also nothing more important to us than our values and our mission. At the same time, I think a lot of donors, uh, at least from the perspective of some Western institutions, is that they care a lot about personal reputation or family purposes. Like sometimes people will say, "Oh, are they do they need to ask because they want to send their children, they want to guarantee a place in our university. Uh, but I think at the same time, it is also important to understand and try to talk to them more and try to comprehend their thinking behind that. At the same time, they are also, a lot of them are also very keen to make the world a better place. So that is, I think if us, all of us here, as representatives from institutions, are making the effort to understand donors about their motivation, about their values, and at the same time clearly communicate our values and our mission to them, I think that would be a good step to build trust. So before we jump to our questions and answer, let me also very quickly talk about Covent Impact to our business that do philanthropy, strategy, impact creation, and cross-border engagement. So we really is in the space to enable philanthropy, both by helping donors to think about strategy, think about the best way to create as much impact as possible, but also facilitate the other side of philanthropy to help um, institutions, NGOs, universities, cultural institutions to also be part of that impact creation. And as Nancy has said, because of my background and because I have worked both in the charity sector and also on the donor side of things, and also because I've worked both in Europe and Asia, I hope that I have that dual perspective. And Cafe Impact for our services, uh, the for universities and nonprofits, we are here to provide landscape overview of what's the landscape, who, what is doing what for key Asian locations, and we also help universities and nonprofits do engagement strategy. So all of that are really to help build clarity, trust, and cultural intelligence for everyone involved. So um, that's all I wanted to
Francis,
share. Just
great.
to, yeah.
Thank you. So
Thank
my first question is, when we talk about Asia, as you start out by saying, it's a huge place.
you.
So, is there, or what things I suppose are common, and what things, or if there are any things that you would say are of some of the things that you've talked about are different? So, in other words, if I'm talking to somebody in Hong Kong, if I'm talking to someone in Malaysia, if I'm talking to someone in India or Singapore, you
Mm,
know, you're talking. There's obviously both geographically a huge difference, but also there's presumably cultural differences. So, what would you say? One, how does one understand the various cultural norms of that particular region, and are there differences?
Yeah. So each is huge, as you have said. So it's almost absurd to say that there's one unifying characteristic across all Asian cultures. But I would say that the emphasis in education and also the importance of keeping families together. I think that is probably close to being a unifying characteristic of all Asian cultures. Uh, so if we talk about even East Asia, we are talking about Korea, Japan, China, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia. That's a huge geographical distance. But I don't know whether you are familiar with the concept called chopstick culture. So I think one sociologist or educationalist uh, talk about that chopstick culture a lot. That there are cultures, for example, Japan, Korea, China, Vietnam, Singapore, and to some extent Thailand, the Philippines or Indonesia that are united by chopsticks on one hand, but actually the kind of Confucian culture or Confucian teaching that, uh, for example, respects authorities, uh, put a lot of emphasis on education, and as a result, they respect teachers, professors, academics. They value community, they value extended family. So I think that is, for one thing, a unifying characteristic for East Asia and to some extent Southeast Asia. Uh, I don't know whether that answers your question.
Well, I think for us from the West looking at Asia, it's the more intel we've gotten, the more understanding into how things work is obviously what the point of today is, and just what the need is too.
Hmm,
Um, and so that's helpful, I think, to understand that there are some very similarities in
hmm,
terms of family, in terms of interests. Um,
hmm,
if one is starting from scratch, let's say, I mean, in other words, you're saying we really want to go out to Asia, and again, when I'm using Asia, it's a question of identifying what Asia means. If you've got
hmm,
alumni, that's one thing, but if you're thinking Asia in the broadest sense might be an interesting place or a useful place to
hmm,
look for fundraising money. And I want to talk about the question of leaving aside education for the moment. What other, if there's other interests that are attractive, or again, that's such a broad thing because each individual is going to have different interests. Um, but if one's thinking about it, I mean, obviously, prospect research, all the things that one does as a fundraiser is important. But where does one start? What should we be thinking about in terms of looking at our own charities and saying, what things is attractive? Where do I start if I'm running a charity or even if I'm working at the university, and because education encompasses so many other things, where do I start on the whole thinking about the people I'm going to be talking to?
hmm, 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 hmm. So I think a good place to start is to look at your database or your CRM. So to give a university to use university as an example, look at where your alumni is the most active. That could be, I mean, depending on the background, depending on where uh historically you are active, or depending on the pattern of people coming or people keep coming to your institution. That could be, for example, India or even a specific city. So, for example, if you realize that, oh, we really have a very active alumni community in in Delhi, then that could be a good place to start. If you're saying that, oh, look, every time I have an Asia concert, the Hong Kong concert will always sell out. Then that could be Hong Kong. Then I would say that before you buy, expensive air tickets and fly 10 people there, it's a good idea to people, talk to people that you are comfortable talking to, or people that you are already in touch with, and just bounce off some idea as to how to start things. And then probably I will argue that that's universal, but particularly attractive to Asia. Is that then you ask those people to put together a few big meals for you. So, find a nice place, do a not very exclusive but not too inclusive. So an appropriately sized dinner or lunch or whatever to meet those people and try to get their sense as to how you can start things there. And more often than not, if you have always been keeping good contact and good relationship with those people, they will volunteer to organize something or offer their own connections or give you some good ideas as to which potential partners you can talk to, which potential donors you can approach, or what interesting things that you can do to attract a larger community or build your presence. And then I think you can go from there. So in essence, try to see who or which city or which community is your best bet. Talk to those people and then go there and take things from there.
Now that's the easy one because that's the university and you've already got the list and all that. So
Mm,
for the organization that doesn't have a database with people that have a relationship already. If
mm,
I if I'm saving elephants in Africa or
mm,
whatever, I
mm,
then my question would be, okay, maybe even I've done prospect research. There's some very good prospect researchers out in Asia,
mm,
some who we know in Singapore, and we know there's a new organization that does AI prospect research. I've identified 20 people that might be that for
mm,
whatever reason we've identified might be interesting. So what does that cultivation look like? So what are they thinking if I'm going to contact them and say, hello, how am I best going to contact them, and how am I best going to cultivate what is that cultivation? I mean, obviously, again, people are different, but in general, is it events? Is it sending brochures? Is it trying to have, what does that look like if I've identified some people who don't know much about us, um,
mm,
but we've identified might be slightly interested in us?
mm. Then I would say that to my earlier point of people looking for cultural and intellectual exposure, then I would say that try to bring uh, someone in your organization who is interesting and who is outgoing and who is willing to engage people. That could be, though let me give you another of my University of Chicago example. So one of the ways that they engage a local community is they bring a historian who was doing China history research. They bring him in Hong Kong and do one or two pop talks that not the kind of academic talks, but talk about stories, talk about the research. If you are an arts or performing arts organization, for example, you're an orchestra, or if your university has a rather good alumni or student choir, bring them to a small concert, invite those people to come, so that you give people a reason to come. You're not just asking them to treat them a good meal, or you're not asking them uh, so that they can listen to your fundraising page. You are bringing them there to have a good evening out, for them to have a good evening out, and for them to have that kind of intellectual or cultural exposure. Uh, I
I
also,
want to put, sorry, please go
sorry,
on.
sorry. I just want to add that you probably have to be patient. You can't expect to achieve a lot in your first visit, but you have to start somewhere.
So then you raised a couple of questions. I just want to press you a bit on the non-university saving elephants, where I can't bring an elephant with me.
Mm,
I mean, if somebody, how is or what would you say the best initial connection would be? Because it may be that just inviting them to something is a way of just to the first outreach to someone, the first
mm,
cultivation. But if they literally don't know much about us at all, what's going to encourage them? Because I've understood that from time to time there's a lot going on, for example, in Hong Kong, and there's a lot of, or in various countries. And so what am I going to do that's going to encourage us? Is it to have, do I need to have, for example, somebody else do I need to find that first person who will
Mm,
from the region to invite people, or can I, as a person sitting in the UK, say we are going to come out and have this wonderful talk about elephants in Africa? Would you be willing to come? And people, even though they've never heard of us, will they still come to something like that?
mm,
So you know, where do you start? How
mm.
do you? What's the best way to start?
Yeah. In that case, I would start with finding a partner. So if your organization's sole purpose is to save elephants in Africa,
Mhm.
uh, then you have to accept the possibility that if you just go to Asia and talk about nothing but saving elephants in Africa, nobody would want to listen to you. But in that case, do you want to approach uh, an environmental organization or a wildlife preservation organization in Hong Kong to do a joint webinar with you, or even a joint seminar if you're willing to fly someone in Hong Kong, for example, to do something and to convince them that, oh, look, uh, do you want to want to do something? You talk about generally uh, the uh, the fact that the Sahara the uh, the Saharan uh, desert is expanding, and then uh, in that particular seminar, you talk about elephants in Africa. To
Right.
use that as a leverage to slowly build your reputation and to leverage on your partners' database and network to gradually make yourself known.
We've got a wonderful question here that's right on point. I work for a humanitarian organization. We'll be presenting our work on an international humanitarian standards. How could I attract potential donors to the event or for a first meeting? So here's something that's going to happen. It's going to be extremely interesting. Um, what's is there? What would be your suggestion of something, and how would people respond to um, and just that kind of an outreach saying this is wonderful? Or can you attract potential people to that?
Mm, mm. So I think I would first let's say the word of caution that if you are if your organization is doing some wonderful, great humanitarian work, you still want to look at um, the cities or the country that you are going to and see whether that is something sensitive. I think that's important. Uh, you may decide that you still want to do things regardless, but it's important to know where the government stands, for example. And then I think this so I will say two things. First, you still want to see whether there are reputable partners on the ground that would like to collaborate with you. I think chances are that if you uh, are not well, even if you're not well known to the city or to the general public, but you are well known within that sector, for example, then I think one thing about Asia is that organizations and people are very willing to collaborate with uh, relatively unknown but reputable peer organizations in the Western world. So I think that's one thing. The other thing, of course, depending on the humanitarian mission that you're on, do some research as to who are the people that could be interested. And the other thing is that uh, also to my earlier point, I think uh, one thing that the Asian people are still very open-minded about is that uh, a lot of them still look up to what the Western world is doing, especially on things like performing arts, humanitarian, human rights, those kind of things. So I think my suggestion is don't be shy. Or of course, you don't want to be arrogant. You want to be culturally sensitive, but at the same time, don't be shy to tell people that look, these are the things that we have been doing, and we are uh, uh, we are sort of building on the tradition and our histories of doing good things in Europe for the past 80 years, 100 years, or whatever, and find a partner and use them to build a network.
I mean, what seems to be coming across when you talk about the partners is just that you need a local somebody to
Mm.
help do that, and that's quite crucial. And
Yes.
we have a great question because this is kind of where I wanted to go anyway. So thank you, Elizabeth. It's a fundraiser. What do I need to know about power dynamics and what level of person I need to bring to donor prospect meetings? Um, and I guess I wanted to start out by asking you. I remember somebody saying that if you are talking to a younger person um, that's very international, you need to be aware of the fact that sometimes the money is still held by the grandfather, who isn't an international person, and they still hold the purse strings. So you need to be conscious of what they are of who you ultimately are talking to. And so I think that that question, and then this question of the power dynamics first. Let's take that first, and then the question of what level of person do you need to bring, so that obviously, and the question maybe of face is worth talking about briefly in that
Yeah.
context. But let's talk about the power dynamics, about how power dynamics work in the donor community and in families in Asia.
Mm. Yeah, so I think power dynamic, of course, is a huge question. But I agree totally with you that for all the talks, we hear a lot about, or we ourselves talk a lot about the intergenerational transfer of wealth, right? But yeah, I think to your point, I agree completely that even if we are talking about somebody died and passing on their estate to the next generation, that kind of the the ghost of the ancestors, right, or the ghost of the last generation, they are still here. And to example, if you are going to meet a 30 something or 40 something, you can almost be assured that whatever whatever ideas that they have regarding using their father's money or their grandfather's money, uh, and stuff like that, uh, the the one the one who is going to do the green light is still the patriarch or the matriarch. So you have to bear in mind uh, the kind of sort of power dynamics that they have and the messaging. So I think it's almost always useful to think about the things that you are going to present to them to have that global and local uh, element. So I've recently spoken to someone who is fundraising for a UK institutions, and they were saying that when they present the proposal, they were they was asked about how the program that is going to benefit a UK institution is also going to benefit the local Asian community. So I think it's important to have that in mind so that the patriarch or the matriarch who doesn't have the international connections and who are likely to be more engaged to the local community compared with their children and grandchildren, make sure that you have a message in your proposal to to hit their heart, right? To engage them. So I think that's the power dynamic bit. Do you have any follow-up questions before I move on to?
Yeah, that's a really good thought of how
Mm,
to bring people to bring other generations in is
mm,
to talk about
mm.
local. That's a really useful thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so this next one, so I guess we're talking a bit about face too, when we're
Mm,
talking about the level of person. So if you could just talk about that whole concept of face, and then how that translates into who you need to bring into a
Mm.
conversation, and whether face still means something in today's world in Asia.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. So as I've said, having your vice chancellor or your board chair or CEO it almost always help. And the other thing is that so interestingly when I think back some of the more effective meetings that I had in the past, whether from the donor side or from the donee side, is that Asian philanthropists are almost always impressed by the down-to-earth and easygoing high-power people in the West. So I don't know whether there's because no I see some smiley face in our audience. I don't know whether at least for some of the older generation Asians, that they are used to people who look authoritative, who are powerful, and that kind of people who are high up there. But I think Western institutions usually are very good at having um, having vice chancellors or CEOs or board chairs who are down to earth, kind, warm, willing to listen. And I think those are some of the best cards that universities or cultural institutions or whatever can play. Uh, so from my experience, if an institution can afford having two people going to a meeting or going for a meal, then it's almost useful to bring a frontline person. If you are trying to sell uh, a research project, then bring the scientist, bring the researcher. If you are going to ask someone to pay for your concerts, then bring an instrumentalist, bring a musician. Uh, so that kind of combination, in my experience, usually work well.
Is there anything that you would suggest that somebody fundraising in the region absolutely not do?
Mm,
What is the disaster you want to make certain everybody goes away remembering not to do?
mm, mm. I'm happy to report that I really see those disasters, but I've seen near disasters happen, and that's usually people who consciously or unconsciously just talk about their Western experience. Um, so of course, not everyone uh, has the privilege of going around the world and seeing all parts of the world. But I think it's important to at least be aware that you are in Asia or you are talking to an Asian. I mean, even some rather uh, uh, simple things like you talk about Asian food or you talk about some travel experience when you are in the continent would help a lot. Would be indefinitely better than you just talk about things happening in the UK or in Europe, for example.
Well, I think that also asks, and Mark David sort of asked a similar question, which was sort of coming from that. Is there a point at which either, that you would say, don't ask it the first time you meet somebody, or
Mm,
how do you, how does this win? Is there something different, I guess, about that whole making an ask that would happen with your engagement in Asia. In other words, if you ask somebody, if you say, "Hello, nice to meet you. Can you give me money?" and that absolutely kills the conversation. Or thank you very much for coming to lunch. Okay, give me money. If that's going to kill it off, I mean, that's the kind of is there something in there? So how do you kind of get a sense of when the right time is? And is it different from your experience of the of fundraising in the West?
No, I don't think it's too different. I mean, I mean, of course, if you are going to raise a considerable sum of money, then you are not going to behave like the people in a tube station, right? Outside of a tube station where they ask you for £5 and stuff. Uh, and the other thing is that I mean, if they are well traveled, or uh, if they are mature, wealthy people, let's put it this way, they will know that the reason why you want to engage them is probably going to lead to an ask. But I would say I would still think that it's usually not a good idea to just ask them uh, for money the first time you meet them. There could be exceptions. If you already know those people very well, then probably you can ask. But I would still say that it's probably the same principle as fundraising in the West, that you try to pace your messages, and don't do the ask until the second time or third time you meet them.
I mean, is it possible? The question is to cultivate and then steward. And this is a question we get all the time, obviously, since we deal with international cross-border funding, is how in the world do you cultivate and steward donors when you can't be there all the time? Um, and is that even harder with Asian donors, where relationships are so important? Is it possible, or do you need to somehow have find some way of having a local relationship um, with Asian donors?
Mm. So yeah, I mean, of course, it's better to have someone local. Of course, it's better if you can be physically present all the time. But but I mean, this is no. If that's a fact that you have to endure, then you have to endure that. If you are a Western institution, and you are hoping to raise money in Asia, then there's probably nothing that you can do to be physically present all the time. I know some fundraising consultants to provide services, or they could introduce you to someone uh, who can be your local fundraising contact point on a part-time or full-time basis. But as I've said first, it isn't always going to be cost effective. And second, if you don't give them enough things to do, then it's probably also a waste of money. Uh, so then I think the second best option would be to give yourself a regularity of doing something on the ground. And you also let the other people know that, oh, look, so this is April, I'm now here, and after summer, you'll see me again. You
Yeah.
things like that.
I mean, is it possible to cultivate somebody before you actually go out there online, or do you need to start the cultivation by by first inviting them to meet you, or to go to something
Mm,
there, and then stewarding that process after you've met them for the first time?
mm. So my experience is that so it's also a personal sort of revelation that I've now lived in the UK for nearly 5 years, and having worked in UK and having gone through COVID, I would imagine that people in Asia are now much more open to virtual engagement, but it still doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be much better compared with what I experienced in Europe, in the UK. It's still much better to have that initial contact to be in person. Uh, and it's even better to be over food or drink. It's yeah, it's still a very Asian thing. So afterwards, you can set up a Zoom call. you can connect with them virtually, email and stuff. But yeah, initially I would say in person is still much more effective.
Does it does it matter at all whether you've got it whether to have a male or female talking to various people?
I think that that depends quite a lot. Right? That depends on the profile of the people you're talking to, depend on the age of the people you're talking to. So yeah, it really quite depends.
Okay. I suppose we're getting towards the end. Is there
Oh,
any
time flies.
I've got a couple of last questions. So, I asked you what the kind of biggest mistake might be. So I want to ask you, if when people go away from today, what are what is the top, well, first of all, what's the very top takeaway that you want them to understand so that you've spent time trying to help people with their philanthropy,
Hmm,
and you brought up the fact that education is very important, culture is very important, obviously relationship
hmm,
is very important. So what is the top takeaway, if there was one thing that you want people to leave with, what would that
hmm.
be?
So that top tip is something that we haven't been exploring a lot today yet. So I'm going to elaborate a bit. I think you have to find your own differentiator. Why your institution is unique or is providing something unique to Asia. And with that, you have to look inside. You have to convince yourself so that you can also convince your target audience in Asia. What are the things that you are going to do uh, that is customized to the need of Asia? That can be, I mean, can be your research, can be your offering, can be something historical, can be the kind of performing arts or concerts or paintings that you're going to offer to Asia. But you have to create a narrative that is specific to Asia. You don't talk about you don't say the same thing when you talk to someone in the UK. You have to find your own voice. You have to find your own narrative. I think that is very important. So after that, you reach out to people, you determine your internal resources, start to roll out your engagement plan. But first, think about your Asian narrative.
That's really interesting. The I guess the second question then is, um, in some cultures, um, being very specific about what you want, that you want, first of all, you want money, you want whatever, you're very, some cultures are very open about it,
Hmm.
where I think you touched on it early in the thing, but I just wanted to come back to it a little bit. Others are very nervous about asking for money. And I just wondered how open one should. I just want to sort of nail down how open one should be about the your need, your desire, your the point that you're sort of there
Hmm.
for.
Hmm. I think in general, Asian people are still not very upfront. They're still a bit shy about talk about money, and so I think for fundraising, it's the same as other aspects of doing businesses in Asia. You will, for example, go out for a long lunch or long dinner. In the first 2 hours and 45 minutes, you talk about traveling, you talk about your favorite football team, you talk about golfing, you talk about weather, and and then you leave until the final 15 minutes to mention a bit about money, about the project you have in mind, and then you say, "Oh, we'll follow up with you." So I think that's the that's the kind of subtleness, or that's how you don't talk about money or fundraising upfront. But you still have to ensure that whatever happened in the first 2 hours and 45 minutes, you are still, for example, sober enough, sober enough to talk about the important things in the last 15 minutes.
That's also really good intel. Well, I think we've got 2 minutes. So in the last 2 minutes, I think I mean this is something we could do a whole day on because there's so many questions about this and how one could do it. But I think some of the really important things that you've raised is incredibly useful to understand. So, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us. Um, um, Thank you all for coming. So again, if you don't know Chaplain York, we specialize in international donations from one country to another. So that's why we're dealing with this. We have a Hong Kong foundation, and we are dealing with other countries. You will be getting a recording of this, whether you're here or not, whether you want it or not. You'll get it in an email, so look out for that. I'm sure that Francis would be very happy to hear from anybody. If you have any specific questions, please feel free to contact him. Please feel free to contact me. Again, thank you, Francis, for giving us your time and your thoughts. And thank you all for spending time with us. And we look forward to seeing you hopefully at another event. Thank you all.
Yes, thank
Have a
you
good
very
rest
much.
of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.